My daughter-in-law pulled my Christmas stocking from the mantel and said, "These are only for immediate family." My son looked away, so I went home, canceled their money, changed my locks, and showed them what happens when free help finally walks out. "These are only for immediate family," Brenda said, sliding my burgundy Christmas stocking off the mantelpiece and tossing it onto an empty armchair. I stood frozen in the middle of my son's living room, still holding the piping hot casserole dish filled with the potato gratin Brenda had specifically asked me to make. My son, Christopher, kept his eyes glued to his phone, pretending he hadn't heard a thing. Nobody would look at me, not even my granddaughter, Maisie, who was entirely focused on her new building blocks. It was Christmas Day, and outside. A heavy blanket of snow covered the streets of Grand Rapids. In that single, quiet moment, I finally realized that to my daughter-in-law. I was nothing more than a convenient, on-call babysitter, without a word. I set the casserole dish on the dining table, grabbed my coat from the rack, and picked up my keys. No shouting, no tears, no dramatic scene. "I'm going to head out," I said evenly. Christopher glanced up, looking visibly uncomfortable. "Mom, don't make a big deal out of this. We're about to eat." He called after me, but I was already pulling the front door shut. On the drive back to my apartment, my mind was racing. Since my husband passed away, I had been sending Christopher and Brenda $350 every month to help with groceries, picking Maisie up from daycare 3 times a week, and covering the insurance on their car. Back in my kitchen, I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and pulled out my calendar. I took a red pen and crossed out every upcoming babysitting shift for the new year. If I wasn't considered immediate family, then I certainly didn't need to carry the burdens of one. I didn't cry. I just felt a deep, clear stillness wash over me. Tomorrow was the day after Christmas, and while the bank branches were closed, my online banking worked perfectly. The first step was already taken. The next morning, I was up by 7, sitting at the kitchen table with my reading glasses and a stack of bank statements. I wanted to see it in black and white, exactly how much money and time I had poured into my son's household over the last 2 years. The numbers didn't lie. Alongside the monthly $350 transfer for groceries, I found a steady stream of charges from Brenda's favorite online boutiques. She had been using my debit card info, which I'd given her once for a last-minute emergency gift, to fund her own shopping. $60 here, $90 there, sometimes over $100. She had quietly integrated my generosity into her personal budget, while I was adding up the total. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Brenda in our group chat. "Need you to pick Maisie up from daycare tomorrow at 2. Christopher has overtime and I have a hair appointment. Pick up milk and bread on your way." No apology for Christmas Day. No sign of regret. It was a flat-out directive, written as if I were an employee she could boss around at will. I looked at the keychain sitting next to my statements. It held the spare key to their house, the one they gave me, so I could feel welcome anytime. I didn't write a long, defensive reply. I just deleted the message and logged into my bank account. With a few clicks, I canceled the recurring $350 monthly transfer that was scheduled to go out on the 1st of the month. Then, I called the bank and reported my debit card as lost to ensure a new one would be issued with a different number. Brenda assumed I would just take the hit like I always did to keep the peace, but that peace was costing me too much. Tomorrow, the regular work week would start, and they would face the first taste of my decision. It was Tuesday afternoon, the first real business day after the holidays. My phone rang right on cue at 2 o'clock. I was at the grocery store, picking out some fresh produce for myself. When Christopher's name popped up on the screen, I answered but stayed completely calm, standing quietly by the produce aisle. "Mom, Brenda's at the salon and the daycare just called. Why haven't you picked up Maisie yet?" "She's waiting," he said, his voice tight with stress. He fully expected me to drop everything and run, just like always, because I'm not coming. "Christopher," I replied smoothly, dropping a bag of coffee into my cart. "I told you before that things were going to change. You two need to figure out how to get Maisie." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, he snapped. "You know how crazy our schedules are? Brenda can't just walk out in the middle of an appointment. Can't you just act normal for once?" My heart was thumping, but I kept my voice entirely steady. "I'm letting you know as a courtesy. Christopher, I'm not debating this with you. You're the parents." I hung up before he could argue further and flipped my phone to silent. It felt incredibly liberating to walk through the aisles without rushing. When I got home, I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and sat in my armchair. I knew this phone call was just the opening act. Brenda was going to be livid that she had to cut her appointment short to handle her own child, but that was her responsibility now, not mine. Late that afternoon, I heard the familiar thud of a car door outside, followed by heavy, aggressive knocking on my apartment door. I opened the door only a few inches, keeping the safety chain engaged. Brenda stood there, her face flushed with anger, holding a sleepy Maisie on her hip. "What is your problem?" "Irene," she hissed, skipping any form of greeting. "I had to leave my appointment early and pay a $50 cancellation fee because of you. Maisie was crying because all the other kids were already picked up. How can you be so selfish just because we needed to clear a little space on the mantle at Christmas?" I looked past her into the hallway, then met her gaze directly. "Well, since there wasn't room for me with the immediate family, Brenda, I figured I shouldn't be taking on immediate family duties," I said calmly. "You wanted your boundaries, so now you have them. Completely." Christopher came jogging up the stairs behind her, looking exhausted. "Mom, come on. Don't make this so complicated over something so small." He chimed in. "We're family. You don't keep score on every little thing. We thought you liked feeling useful." Those words proved they still didn't get it. They didn't see me as a mother or a grandmother. They saw me as a free asset that was supposed to run on autopilot. "No, I'm not doing this anymore," I said firmly. "You're a grown man, Christopher. It's time to manage your own life like an adult." Brenda let out a harsh laugh. "Fine. If you're going to be this petty, we don't need your help anyway. Just don't come crying to us later when you don't get to see Maisie." She spun around and pulled Christopher down the hall. I closed the door, took a deep breath, and knew another shock was headed their way. 2 days passed in total silence. I genuinely enjoyed the quiet in my apartment, caught up on some deep cleaning, and read a book. But on Friday morning, my phone started vibrating off the hook. Christopher tried calling 4 times back to back when I finally picked up. His voice was frantic, not angry. "Mom, what's wrong with your bank account? Brenda tried to pay for our big grocery haul for New Year's weekend, but your card was declined, and that $350 transfer never hit our account." I sat at my kitchen table, sipping my tea. "There's nothing wrong with my account," Christopher, I canceled the monthly transfer and ordered a new card. I explained calmly. Since I'm not part of the inner circle, I don't see any reason to bankroll your household. You both make good money. You can pay for your own groceries. On the other end, I heard Brenda gasp. He must have had me on speakerphone. You can't do that, she yelled. We already budgeted that money. How are we supposed to pay the quarterly property tax bill that just came in? The entitlement was staggering. They honestly believed they had a permanent right to my retirement savings. That isn't my problem, I said coldly. You own a beautiful home and take 2 vacations a year if you can't cover your taxes. You need to look at your own spending habits. Christopher tried a different angle, his voice softening. Mom, please, we're your family. You can't just leave us high and dry. But the guilt trip didn't work anymore. I have to go. Christopher, I'm heading out to run errands, I said, and ended the call. The pressure was mounting, but I was ready for what came next. To everyone who has become part of the Quiet Revenge family, thank you. Many people have asked how they can support our work, although AI may assist with certain parts of the creative process. Every story is carefully selected, edited, fact-checked, reviewed, and produced by our team before it reaches you. At the moment, our channel cannot earn through YouTube, so support from our viewers helps us continue sharing meaningful stories about family, resilience, justice, and hope. If you'd like to help, even the price of a small cup of coffee makes a real difference. Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/Quiet Revenge Family Ko-fi, https://ko-fi.com/Thestry Family. PayPal https://www.paypal.com/paypalm/Kanhoangmin. Thank you for helping keep these stories alive. Instead of staying home and waiting for the next wave of drama, I decided to focus entirely on my own life. I went to the bank to open a separate high-yield savings account, immediately depositing the $350 I used to send to Christopher. That money was officially mine to enjoy. Afterward, I met up with my longtime neighbor, Martha, at a diner down the street. We hadn't caught up in months because I was always rearranging my life around Maisie's daycare schedule. My goodness, Irene, you look wonderful, Martha said as the waitress poured our coffee. I told her briefly that I was stepping back from family obligations to focus on myself, keeping the details vague to avoid unnecessary gossip. Martha nodded in total agreement. It's about time. You were running yourself ragged for them. She suggested we join a local water aerobics class together next week and look into booking a weekend Amtrak trip to Chicago in the spring. I felt a surge of genuine excitement I hadn't felt in years. My life belonged to me again when I got home that afternoon. I found a handwritten note from Christopher slid into my mailbox. We need to talk. We're coming over Sunday at 11 a.m. No question about whether I was free. Just a demand for my time. They still thought they could schedule me like an appointment. I simply smiled, walked inside, and tossed my keys onto the counter. They had no idea I already had plans for Sunday. They were going to knock on an empty door and learn a hard lesson about boundaries. By Sunday morning at 10:30, I was already sitting on the train to Chicago with Martha. We were planning to visit an art museum and treat ourselves to a nice dinner. I purposefully kept my phone on silent inside my purse. I refused to let them ruin my day. It wasn't until late that afternoon, while we were sitting in a lovely bistro downtown, that I finally checked my screen. I had 7 missed calls from Christopher and 3 furious text messages from Brenda. The first text arrived at 11:15. "Where are you? We're standing outside your apartment with Maisie. We skipped our usual Sunday lunch to come fix this." The second text came 30 minutes later. "This is completely disrespectful. You knew we were coming at 11. Christopher even tried using his spare key. But you aren't here. Where could you possibly be?" Reading those words didn't make me angry. It just confirmed I was doing the right thing. Christopher had actually tried to walk right into my apartment without my permission, simply because I wasn't waiting around for them. That was the absolute final straw. My apartment was my sanctuary, my private home, and no one had the right to enter it without an invitation. I typed out a quick, direct response. "I never agreed to meet at 11. I am out of town enjoying my Sunday. And Christopher, that is the last time you ever attempt to enter my home uninvited." I put my phone away and focused entirely on my dinner and my conversation with Martha. My next move was already set in stone. First thing tomorrow morning, I was changing the locks. On Monday morning, a local locksmith arrived at my apartment right on schedule at 9 o'clock. It took less than 20 minutes for him to swap out the deadbolt on my front door. When he finished, he handed me 3 shiny, brand new keys. I kept one for my main ring, put one on my backup set, and gave the third to Martha in case of an emergency. Christopher's old key was officially useless. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely secure and independent in my own home, an hour after the locksmith left. My landline rang. It was Christopher. "Mom, what was that yesterday? Brenda is furious. We came over to handle this like adults, and you just blew us off," he said, his voice dripping with wounded pride. "I told you that I'm managing my own life now." "Christopher," I answered calmly, "and that means nobody walks into my apartment unannounced. By the way, don't worry about returning your spare key. I had the locks changed this morning." The line went completely dead. I could hear nothing but the faint sound of my son's breathing. It seemed the reality of the situation was finally sinking in. You changed the locks?" he asked, sounding utterly blindsided. "You don't even trust me with a key. We're your family. Trust is earned. Christopher, you 2 used me for months, and then you treated me like an outsider on Christmas Day. These are the consequences of those choices." He didn't even try to argue. He just hung up. It was the first time he had ended a conversation because he simply had nothing left to say. But the final chapter wasn't written yet. 2 weeks of total radio silence passed. Then, in mid-January, Christopher showed up at my door completely unannounced and alone. He looked pale, with dark circles bruising the skin under his eyes. I let him in, and he sat down at the kitchen table, right in the spot he used to claim when he was growing up. "Mom, we can't keep living like this," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Brenda and I are fighting constantly. Daycare costs just went up. The property taxes are hanging over our heads. And we're scraping by trying to get Maisie picked up without getting in trouble at work. We need your help. Please." I looked at my son. I didn't feel a shred of smug triumph, only a deep sadness for how dependent and fragile his life had become. "Christopher, you both have good corporate jobs. If you're struggling financially, you need to downsize your lifestyle, not view my retirement fund as your safety net," I said, keeping my voice firm. And as for Maisie, I love being a grandmother. And I'm happy to watch her occasionally, but only when we plan it in advance. I am not a backup daycare center. He stared down at his hands. Brenda says if you won't help us out, you're turning your back on your own flesh and blood. I shook my head. What Brenda says doesn't carry weight with me anymore. She humiliated me on Christmas Day. If you want my help or my presence in your lives, I expect a genuine face-to-face apology from her. Until then, the bank is closed. Christopher sat in silence for a long time. He finally realized that his usual emotional leverage didn't work on me anymore. He stood up and quietly left the apartment. The dynamic between us had permanently shifted. Today is a beautiful, crisp winter day in late February. I'm sitting in my living room, drinking a hot cup of tea, looking out at the snow dusting the courtyard. On my console table sits my new planner, fully booked with things that bring me joy: water aerobics with Martha, a local book club, and our train tickets to Chicago for April. Yesterday evening, an unexpected postcard arrived in the mail. On the back, written in Brenda's handwriting, were the words, "We are truly sorry about Christmas. We'd love to have you over for coffee this coming Sunday, just the four of us." I placed the postcard on the mantelpiece, right next to the spot where my stocking used to hang. I'm going to accept the invitation, but I am going on my own terms. I will drive over, enjoy a piece of cake, give my granddaughter Maisie a huge hug, and leave after exactly 2 hours. My car insurance will be paid from my own pocket, and my savings will stay safely in my high-yield account. They have finally learned that a mother is not a blank check or a free labor pool. She is an independent person who commands respect. When I look in the mirror now, I see a woman I can truly be proud of. I didn't destroy my family. I gave them the space they needed to finally grow up and take responsibility for their own lives. And in the process, I reclaimed my own life, peaceful, entirely independent, and filled with a profound, quiet contentment. I'm ready for whatever the rest of the year brings, because I finally remember exactly who I am and what I'm worth. To everyone who has become part of the Quiet Revenge family, thank you. Many people have asked how they can support our work. Although AI may assist with certain parts of the creative process, every story is carefully selected, edited, fact-checked, reviewed, and produced by our team before it reaches you. At the moment, our channel cannot earn through YouTube, so support from our viewers helps us continue sharing meaningful stories about family, resilience, justice, and hope. If you'd like to help, even the price of a small cup of coffee makes a real difference. Patreon https://www.patreon.com/quietrevengeFamily. Ko-fi https://ko-fi.com/thestryfamily. PayPal https://www.paypal.com/paypalm/Kun Hwangmin. Thank you for helping keep these stories alive.